One day I was an ordinary merchant, and the next day I was the keeper of a state secret. I am the man who must save the empire from destruction. My only weapon is a piece of silk soaked in blood. I don't know who to trust. My enemies are hunting me down. Will dawn break, or will everything be plunged into eternal darkness? The last copper coin clinked into the lockbox as Janeway snapped the lid shut. Dusk pressed against the silk stall, dye-scented steam still curling from the vats like restless ghosts. He rolled his stiff shoulders, tasting indigo on the air, and began lowering the bamboo awning. Each tug of the rope rasped through the pulley, a lonely sound in a marketplace already half devoured by shadow. A sudden boot scraped stone behind him. Janeway spun, heart kicking. A figure swayed at the edge of lantern light. Cloak torn, left sleeve black with blood. The stranger's breath came in short, wet bursts. Beneath the hood, a single eye gleamed, fever bright. "Mercy!" the man rasped, voice raw as flint. "Hide it!" He thrust forward a scrap of crimson silk no larger than a sparrow's wing. In the failing light the cloth seemed to burn, threads of gold glinting like fresh-cut arteries. Janeway's fingers closed around it instinctively. The silk was still warm, slick with the stranger's blood. "What? No names." The stranger's good eye flicked toward the alley mouth. Hoofbeats echoed, slow, deliberate. "They'll kill for this. Keep it from them." Janeway's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He had seen soldiers drag silk merchants away before, had heard the screams that followed. The embroidered characters on the cloth were too small to read in the half-dark, but the urgency in the stranger's grip was unmistakable. The hoofbeats paused. Torchlight bled across the far wall. With a choked sound the stranger shoved Janeway back toward the stall. "Inside. Now." Janeway stumbled, silk clenched in his fist. He ducked beneath the half-lowered awning, pressing between stacked bolts of peacock blue and moon white. The scent of sandalwood dye gagged him. His own pulse roared in his ears. Outside, boots struck stone, 2, maybe 3 sets. A voice barked an order. Steel scraped free of scabbards. "Search every stall." The voice growled. Janeway's breath froze. He stared at the scrap in his hand. Tiny stitches forming dragons, clouds, a seal he did not recognize. Precious work, too fine for any merchant to afford. Evidence, the stranger had called it. Evidence of what? Torchlight flared closer. He could see the outline of a guard's helmet through the awning's weave. On instinct Janeway slid the scrap between 2 untouched bolts of imperial yellow. The silk drank the blood, hiding the stain beneath layers of luxury. He folded the edges so the embroidery vanished, then straightened the display as if nothing had happened. A shadow fell across the threshold. Janeway lifted his chin, forcing calm into his voice. "Evening, Captain. We're closed." The guard's gauntlet hand pushed the awning aside. Torchlight spilled over bolts of silk, over Janeway's sweat-slicked face. The stranger was gone. Only a smear of blood on the cobblestones remained. "You see anyone run past?" the guard demanded. Janeway's tongue felt thick. He shook his head. "Only the wind." The guard studied the stall, eyes lingering on the imperial yellow. Janeway's stomach clenched around a cold stone. At last the man grunted, turned away. Silence flooded back like a tide. Janeway waited until the hoofbeats faded before he dared breathe. He reached between the bolts and drew out the scrap again. By moonlight the embroidery gleamed, every golden thread whispering of treason and salvation alike. Somewhere in the distance a drum began to beat, slow, measured, the city's heartbeat of curfew. Janeway closed his fist around the silk. He was no hero, only a man who sold beauty for a living. Yet the weight in his palm felt heavier than any bolt he had ever woven. Tomorrow the marketplace would open again, bright and loud. But tonight, in the hush between lantern and dawn, Janeway stood alone with the stranger's secret sewn in silk, unread, unfathomable, and already shaping the fate of kingdoms. The dawn bell had not yet rung when the first drum sounded, low, deliberate, like a warning heartbeat beneath the cobblestones. Janeway jolted awake on his cot behind the stall, ears straining. Another drum answered, closer. Soldiers. He rolled to his feet, the scrap of silk still clenched in his fist from the night. By the weak lamplight he saw the embroidery clearly now. Dragons coiled around columns of minuscule characters, a vermilion seal at the corner, treason stitched in gold. He shoved it beneath a folded length of indigo, heart hammering. Outside, the marketplace stirred with a different rhythm. Shutters slammed like startled wings. Vendors who usually sang over their wares now whispered, eyes darting toward the main gate. The scent of fear, sharp, metallic, overrode the usual perfume of camphor and dye. Jean Wei's hands shook as he arranged bolts of silk into perfect towers, each fold hiding the forbidden scrap deeper. He told himself it wasn't his war. He was a merchant, not a rebel. Yet every rustle of fabric sounded like an accusation. Boots struck stone in unison. 6 guards entered the lane, torches raised, armor gleaming like teeth. Their captain, a scar splitting his left eyebrow, barked orders in clipped northern dialect. Search every stall. The trader's confederate is here. The first stall belonged to Old Chun, the tea seller. They overturned jars, scattered leaves like green snow. Chun protested. A guard backhanded him into the dust. Jean Wei's stomach lurched. Next was the pottery woman, Mei Lin. Her bowls shattered beneath boot heels. A child began to cry. Jean Wei tasted bile. Then they reached him. Open, the captain commanded. Jean Wei lifted the awning, palm slick. Torchlight flooded the stall, revealing every hue of silk he had ever loved, now potential evidence. The captain's gaze lingered on the imperial yellow where the letter lay hidden. He stepped closer. Fine stock, the captain murmured, running a gauntlet finger along a bolt. The metal snagged a loose thread. Jean Wei's breath caught. Expensive. Who buys such luxury these days? Travelers, from the capital, Jean Wei stammered. The captain's eyes narrowed. Show me the ledger. While Jean Wei fumbled for the book, a younger guard prowled the rear shelves. His dagger tip scraped across the indigo bolt. Once, twice, catching on something stiff beneath the fabric. Jean Wei's vision tunneled. Sir, the guard called. There's a hem sewn shut here. The captain turned. Time fractured. Jean Wei saw the blade poised to slice, the embroidered dragons about to spill into torchlight like living things. He saw the noose tightening around his neck. A voice cracked across the lane. Mei Lin, face streaked with tears, shouting, They went that way. A man in black, toward the river. Every torch swung toward her. The captain hesitated, suspicion warring with urgency. In that heartbeat Jean Wei yanked the indigo bolt free, clutching it to his chest as if protecting his wares. The hidden letter shifted, pressing against his ribs like a second, treacherous heart. Move! The captain barked. The guards streamed past, boots thundering toward the phantom fugitive. Dust rose in their wake. Silence crashed down. Jean Wei's knees buckled. He leaned against the stall frame, indigo bolt trembling in his arms. Mei Lin caught his eye across the lane, just a flicker of acknowledgement, then bent to gather her broken pottery. The marketplace exhaled. Somewhere a bird dared to sing again. But beneath Jean Wei's fingernails, the embroidered silk seemed to pulse with its own life, whispering that tomorrow the soldiers would return, and next time there would be no distraction. He folded the bolt slowly, hiding the letter deeper than ever. The sun climbed, indifferent to secrets. Yet every shadow now looked like a doorway to betrayal, every customer a potential spy. Jean Wei resumed stacking silks, hands steadier than they had any right to be. When the first customer arrived, a noblewoman in jade green, he bowed low, smile practiced. But beneath his courtesy, a new resolve hardened. The letter would stay hidden, whatever the cost. Because in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Jean Wei had learned that innocence could be as fragile as silk, and twice as deadly. The execution bell tolled at noon, its iron tongue striking the sky like a hammer on a funeral drum. Jean Wei stood in the press of bodies at the crossroads. The silk stall shuddered for the first time in 10 years. Around him the crowd swelled. Merchants, farmers, children hoisted on shoulders for a better view. The air stank of hot sandalwood and hotter blood. Scaffold timbers rose against a sky the color of dull steel. The stranger, name still unknown, was dragged up the steps in chains that sang with each stumble. His left eye was swollen shut. The right found Jean-Wei in the crush and held him. No nod, no plea, just a single searing glance that said, "Remember." Jean-Wei's fingers curled around the hidden scrap inside his sleeve, the embroidered dragons rasping against his skin like tiny claws. He had come to witness because not witnessing felt like a worse betrayal. Yet each heartbeat accused him. You could have burned it. You could have run. The magistrate read the charge in a voice stripped of mercy. Conspiracy against the emperor. Possession of seditious correspondence. The words fluttered like carrion birds above the square. Jean-Wei tasted iron. He realized he had bitten his lip. When the blade flashed up, sunlight shattered along its edge. A collective inhale rippled through the crowd, one enormous lung holding its breath. The stranger's knees buckled, but he did not cry out. Instead, his lips moved. Jean-Wei read them across 20 paces. Protect. Then the sword fell. Silence slammed down heavier than the head that rolled. For 3 heartbeats the square was a painted tableau. Blood on wood, sun on steel, the stranger's good eye still open, staring not at the sky but at Jean-Wei. Then the crowd exhaled in a single, ragged moan. Children were hustled away. Vendors began to pack. Yet no one left quickly. They drifted like leaves circling a drain, trading whispers that carried Jean-Wei's guilt on every tongue. They say he carried a list of names, muttered a spice seller, voice trembling. Names of traitors in high places. Names sewn in gold, another answered. Gold the color of imperial robes. Jean-Wei's stomach lurched. He pulled his hood lower and edged backward, but the rumors clung like burrs, each retelling embroidered new details. The stranger had been part of a network stretching from the palace kitchens to the frontier garrisons. The list contained bribes, battle plans, a schedule for the emperor's assassination on the night of the next full moon. By the time the scaffold was scrubbed clean, the crowd had thinned to stragglers and gawkers. Jean-Wei lingered longest, staring at the dark stain soaking into the boards. He imagined the embroidered dragons drinking that blood, growing heavier, more demanding. A hand brushed his sleeve. Mei Lin, the pottery woman, eyes red-rimmed. "You knew him," she whispered. It wasn't a question. Jean-Wei's denial died unspoken. Mei Lin's gaze dropped to his clenched fist where the silk edge peaked. Understanding flickered across her face, followed by something colder. Calculation or fear? He couldn't tell. "Be careful," she said, and vanished into the dispersing crowd. Dusk bled purple across the sky. Jean-Wei walked the long way home, past alleys where shadows pooled like spilled ink. Every footfall echoed with imagined pursuit. When at last he reached the shuttered stall, he barred the door and lit a single lamp. In its trembling glow, the embroidered characters seemed to writhe. He traced them with a shaking finger. Names of ministers, generals, palace eunuchs. Proof enough to topple dynasties, or to bury a simple merchant beneath the rubble. The lamp guttered. Somewhere in the city, a curfew drum began its slow, inexorable count. Each beat tightened the noose a fraction more. Jean-Wei pressed the silk against his heart, feeling the dead man's last breath in every thread. Tomorrow the soldiers would return, asking sharper questions. Tomorrow the marketplace would reopen, but its colors would look different, every bolt of silk a potential shroud, every smile a mask. Outside, the drum reached its final note. Silence fell like a verdict. Jean-Wei blew out the lamp and sat in darkness, the letter warm against his skin, the stranger's blood still speaking in the language of dragons. "Protect," it whispered. "Protect or be devoured." He closed his eyes and saw the scaffold again, the stranger's gaze unblinking even in death. A promise had been forged in that moment, as immutable as silk and twice as sharp. There would be no more hiding, no more waiting. The letter would either save him or destroy everything he had ever loved. Somewhere in the distance, a second drum began to beat, faster than the first. Jin Wei's heart matched its rhythm. The reckoning had already begun, and he was no longer a merchant standing on the sidelines. He was the last thread holding a conspiracy together, and the first to unravel. The hall of celestial judgment filled with the thin, gray light of a reluctant dawn. Frost glazed the stone tiles. Incense smoke curled in slow spirals, carrying the faint, sweet stink of camphor and fear. Clerks in ink-smeared robes shuffled scrolls like funeral papers. Jin Wei stood at the foot of the dais, clutching the crimson scrap that had once been a stranger's lifeline and was now his only shield. He had not slept. The embroidered dragons on the silk seemed to writhe in the torchlight, their golden eyes accusing. He bowed until his forehead brushed cold stone, the weight of every gaze in the hall pressing against his neck. "State your name and purpose," the magistrate commanded. His voice was a dry, quill-scraping parchment. "Jin Wei, silk merchant of the Eastern Ward," he answered, the words tasting of ash. "I bring evidence entrusted to me by a dying man." A ripple moved through the tribunal. Guards shifting spears, scribes lifting brushes like poised daggers. The magistrate extended one pale hand. Jin Wei unfolded the silk with trembling fingers. The cloth whispered like a confession. Characters marched across the fabric in flawless, tiny stitches. Names, dates, sums of silver, passwords for midnight gates. Each syllable glinted like a shard of broken mirror. The magistrate read aloud, voice uninflected, yet every name struck the hall like a mallet on bronze. Governor Lien. 5,000 taels for the western gate left unbarred. Across the hall, Governor Lien's face bleached to the color of spoiled rice. His ceremonial robes rustled as he stepped back, knocking over a lacquered candle stand. Wax hissed on the floor like serpents. General Wu, troop movements sold to the border raiders. General Wu's hand flew to his sword hilt, but two guards were already beside him, spears crossed at his throat. The general's lips moved soundlessly, perhaps reciting a prayer or a curse. Name after name, each revelation a fresh wound carved into the morning air. Ministers, eunuchs, even the emperor's own astrologer, all trapped in silk and thread. The hall grew colder. Incense smoke coiled tighter, as if trying to choke the words before they reached the rafters. When the magistrate reached the final line, his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried farther than any shout. "Sealed by the hand of the traitor, the night before his execution." Silence fell thick, absolute. Jin Wei felt it settle over him like wet wool. He dared to look up. The tribunal benches were a gallery of ghosts. Some men wept, others stared straight ahead as if already watching their own funerals. The magistrate lifted the silk toward the light. Blood had dried rust-brown along one edge, framing the dragons like a halo of guilt. "Merchant Jin Wei," he said slowly, "you have delivered the empire from vipers in its sleeve. Speak your reward." Jin Wei's tongue stuck. He had rehearsed a humble plea, enough silver to buy his mother medicine, nothing more, but the words tangled. Instead, he heard himself say, "Let the innocent be spared. Let the silk that bore treason now bear justice." A murmur of approval rustled through the hall. The magistrate's stern mouth softened, almost a smile. "Justice shall be done, and mercy shown." Guards moved like clockwork. Shackles clinked. The named men were led away, some stumbling, some striding with the defiant dignity of wolves. Their robes dragged across the tiles, leaving pale streaks in the frost. Governor Lien wept openly. General Wu spat at Jin Wei's feet before the spears urged him forward. The astrologer muttered star charts under his breath, as if constellations could still save him. When the last prisoner vanished through the side door, the magistrate turned back to Jin Wei. As promised, the emperor's gratitude. A lacquered box was brought forth. Inside lay gold ingots heavy enough to bow the bearer's arms, and a silk badge embroidered with the character for loyalty in the emperor's own vermilion thread. Jin Wei's hands shook as he accepted it. The gold was warm, yet it felt colder than the stone beneath his knees. Dragons glinted on the badge, smaller cousins to those on the traitor's cloth, but their eyes were clear, untainted. "Rise," the magistrate said. "The Empire remembers those who speak truth when silence is easier." Jinwei stood. Dawn light, now braver, slanted through high windows and struck the gold so fiercely it seemed to burn. Somewhere beyond the hall, he heard the faint clang of the palace bell, 9 measured strokes that marked both an ending and a beginning. As he walked out, the badge thudded against his heart with every step. Behind him, clerks rolled up the incriminating silk to be sealed in crimson archives. The dragons on the cloth no longer snarled. They rested, sated by the justice they had helped devour. In the courtyard, frost melted into silver puddles. Jinwei paused, breathing air that no longer tasted of smoke and fear. He touched the badge, then the hidden scar on his palm where the stranger's blood had dried. The Empire had rewarded him, but the weight he carried was not gold. It was memory, of a dying man's last glance, of silk that drank treason and bled truth. The world would call it triumph. Jinwei knew it was simply survival, polished until it shone like justice itself. He stepped into the waking city, the sun rising behind him, and for the first time the dragons embroidered on his heart did not feel like chains. They felt like wings. The hall of golden chimes swallowed sound the way dusk swallows color. Jinwei stepped across the threshold, boots whispering over carpets so thick they felt like moss on mountain stone. Columns of carved rosewood rose toward a ceiling painted with constellations, the very stars the astrologer had once tried to sell. Incense drifted in slow spirals, sweet and heavy, as if the air itself were bowing. At the far end, the dragon throne loomed. Not gold alone, but gold alive, scales of hammered leaf catching torchlight until the serpent seemed to breathe. Upon it sat the emperor, young, impassive, his robes the color of dried blood edged with frost. His first word was barely audible, yet every guard, every eunuch, every trembling minister felt it settle on their skin like winter rain. "Approach." Jinwei moved forward. 20 paces felt like 20 years. Each step echoed with memory. The stranger's last breath fogging in the night air, the embroidered dragons writhing beneath his palm, the scaffold's dull thud as the blade fell. When he reached the appointed distance, he lowered himself until his forehead touched the cold marble. The scent of camphor and old incense filled his nose. The stones smelled of centuries. "Rise," the emperor said. Jinwei obeyed. The emperor studied him, not with curiosity, but with the calm exactitude of a man weighing silk for flaws. At last he lifted a hand. A eunuch stepped forward bearing a lacquered tray. Upon it lay 5 ingots of gold so pure they seemed to glow from within, and beside them a jade seal the size of a sparrow's egg. The seal was carved with a single character, Zhong, loyalty, its strokes deep and sure. A silk cord of imperial yellow threaded through the jade, ready to rest against a throat. "Merchant Jinwei," the emperor said, each syllable precise as a blade. "You have delivered the empire from rot. Speak your reward." Jinwei's mouth was dry. He had rehearsed humility on the long ride through dawn streets. Ask only for his mother's medicine. A small shop, nothing more. Yet when he opened his mouth, the words came unbidden, shaped by nights of sleepless dread. "Your Majesty, let the innocent be spared. Let the silk that bore treason now bear witness." A hush rippled outward. The emperor's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in assessment. After a heartbeat he nodded once, and the hush deepened into reverence. "Justice shall be done and mercy shown," the emperor repeated, as if tasting the flavor of the vow. He gestured. The eunuch lifted the tray higher, gold catching torchlight like captured fire. "Take these. Wear this. Let all who see the seal remember that truth may come from the humblest hands." Jinwei's fingers closed around the jade. It was cool, impossibly smooth, yet heavier than any coin. When he lifted it, the silk cord brushed his pulse like a living thread. The gold ingots followed, warm, almost feverish, pressing into his palm until he feared they might brand him. He bowed again, deeper this time, forehead scraping stone. The emperor's voice drifted down, softer now, almost conversational. Your mother will have her medicine. Your stall will stand in the marketplace, untouched by tax or tithe. And when you walk the streets, the dragons on that seal will walk with you. Guardians, not chains. Jean Wei rose. The hall seemed taller, the incense thicker. Guards parted like wheat before wind. As he backed away, the emperor's final words followed him, echoing off lacquered pillars. Remember, merchant, loyalty is a blade that cuts both ways. Wield it wisely. Outside, the palace courtyard blazed with late afternoon sun. The gold ingots clinked softly in the pouch at his waist. The jade seal thudded against his heartbeat. He crossed the bridge of white marble where carp drifted like slow flames beneath the water. Courtiers bowed as he passed. Some genuine, some wary, all acknowledging the quiet power stitched into silk and stone. At the outer gate he paused. The city stretched below, tile roofs gleaming, like fish scales, banners snapping in a warm wind that smelled of roasting chestnuts and distant rain. Somewhere in those streets the scaffold still stood, wood darkened by blood that had once been warm. Somewhere the stranger's body lay beneath unmarked earth, his last glance forever etched behind Jean Wei's eyes. Jean Wei touched the seal. The jade was cool against the scar on his palm where the stranger's blood had dried. He had expected triumph. Instead he felt the hush that follows a storm, when broken things settle and the world learns a new shape. He began the long walk home. Each step sounded different against the cobblestones. Lighter, yet burdened. Children darted past, laughing, their shadows stretching like dragons across the walls. An old woman selling persimmons called out a blessing. He nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. By the time he reached the marketplace, dusk had painted the sky the color of bruised plums. The stall waited, awning furled, bolts of silk waiting like old friends. He set the gold ingots beneath the counter, wrapped the seal in a scrap of plain cloth, and laid it among the indigo and peacock hues. The dragons embroidered on the imperial yellow glinted once, then subsided into quiet threads. Jean Wei closed his eyes. In the hush he heard no drumbeat, no marching boots, only the soft rustle of silk and the distant echo of a promise kept. Tomorrow the marketplace would open again, bright and loud. But tonight, beneath a sky rinsed clean by twilight, Jean Wei stood alone with the weight of truth polished until it shone like justice itself. The reward was heavy, so heavy that only a heart schooled in silence could carry it without breaking. He breathed in the scent of dye and dust, and for the first time the dragons on the seal felt not like chains, but like wings, quiet, steady, bearing him forward into whatever dawn would bring.